All right, so hello everyone and welcome to this Nakba-NLP panel. My name is 𝐃𝐢𝐠𝐢𝐭𝐚𝐥 and I'm going to be the host for today. So this is titled Digital Archives and Cultural Heritage in the Large Language Models Era. And we've got four panelists today, Professor Dawn Knight from Cardiff University, Professor Antonio Moreno Sandoval from the University Autonomous of Madrid, and Professor Mustafa Jarrar from Birzeit University, and Professor Mohammed Abdelmajid from British Columbia University. Thank you very much for all of you for your time and for attending our session today. So just a reminder, this is recorded and we'll start by asking the panelists to introduce themselves. So Dawn, can we start with you, please?
Hi, everyone, and thanks for inviting me to this panel. So yes, as Mo said, I'm Professor Dawn Knight from Cardiff University, so Cardiff University in Wales in the UK. I'm a corpus linguist, so I don't work in NLP, but I work with colleagues in NLP. So I've actually collaborated with Mo himself in quite a few different projects. So as I say, I'm a corpus linguist, I'm an applied linguist, and my sort of area of research is kind of thinking about developing frameworks and approaches to the construction and analysis of linguistic corpora, particularly minoritized contexts. So I do a lot of work in Welsh, essentially. I don't know how much introduction you need, Mo, but maybe I'll keep it to that, and I can give you examples and things later as we talk about the particular topic.
Thank you, Dawn. Antonio?
Hi, everyone. Can you hear me? Yeah, okay. So I'm from Madrid. I corpus linguist. I also a computational linguist, and I the head of the computational linguistics lab. And during more than 25 years, we were developing different kinds of resources, linguistic resources, written and spoken in many different languages, including Chinese and Japanese and Arabic, but mainly in Spanish. And I think my most interesting contribution here is because we have a lot of experience in spontaneous speech recordings and corpora and datasets, because it's a very interesting way to preserve culture and language from minorities. So that's my main contribution. I also have in historical test also, sorry, and in classic novels from the Spanish golden century, but I don't think this is relevant for this conference. But my main contribution is talking about spontaneous speech, conversations and recordings and monologues and things like that. Thank you.
Thank you, Antonio. Mohammed?
Yes, hi everybody. Thank you very much again for inviting me for this interesting panel. Happy to be here with you today. I am Mohammed Abdelmajid. I am a Canada Research Chair in Natural Language Processing and Machine Learning here at the University of British Columbia. I'm also an adjunct associate professor of Natural Language Processing at Mohammed bin Zayed University of AI in Abu Dhabi. I apologize I couldn't be with you in person there for those who are in Abu Dhabi. I know it's sunny and nice there during this time of the year. For my own research, I work primarily on large language models across different areas and applications of these. A lot of my earlier work has been focused on representation learning and how we can learn effective representations from different types of data. I have interest across text, speech, and image data. And I'm really interested in one of the areas of applications that I'm really interested in is right on the topic of our panel today, which is related to cultural heritage and how we can develop technologies that would allow us to really engage with our history, identity, cultural heritage across different types of modalities. So I'm really looking forward to our engagement together here through this panel. Back to you, Mahmoud.
Thank you, Mohammed. And finally, with you, Mustafa.
Thank you, Mahmoud. I am Mustafa Jarrar from Birzeit University. I am actually the chair of the PhD program in computer science here, as well as the director of SINA Lab for computational linguistics and artificial intelligence. We are interested in not only in language and also Arabic dialects and so on, but also we try to use our tools, and we have done this in the past, to preserve culture. So we work closely with the cultural heritage activities here in around the country. And so we will be happy to talk about these things.
Great, thank you very much. So I think we are now ready to start our panel. So as I said, there'll be 5 questions today. So I'll start by narrating the question and then giving the panelists a chance to answer those. So we'll go the same order for each question. Sadon, Antonio, Mohammed, and finally Mustafa. And depends on time, we can also take questions from the audience here. I think you can send your question directly to me, and then I'll try to narrate that and give you a chance to answer it. So the first question for today is what best practices exist for working with communities to develop corpora from diverse narratives? Dawn?
Okay, thanks, Mo. So I'm just going to draw on my own sort of experiences, I guess, for this to answer this. Just to give you a bit of context. So at the start, I said I work with kind of minoritized languages, particularly Welsh. I just assumed that people might know what Welsh is, but you might not. So Welsh is Wales itself. So I'm sat in Cardiff in Wales. It represents the largest bilingual community in the UK. So there's about 560,000 speakers of Welsh in Wales at the moment. But it has official status, and everything that we do within Wales has to be bilingual. So everyone has the right to be able to communicate in Welsh and or English. So that's the sort of context. So there is quite a lot of sort of investments and an understanding of the status and the importance of Welsh within this context. One of the things that we developed, so I was the lead on a project where we developed a national corpus of contemporary Welsh, which includes spoken, written, and digital Welsh. The corpus is called 𝐶𝐢𝐿, 𝐶𝐢𝐿, if you want to have a look. And basically, the vision for that was to try to collect a representative sample of Welsh as it's currently used and encountered across different sorts of sort of context, different genres and so on, and different regions. So there's a lot of regional variety or variation in spoken Welsh that we wanted to capture. And also to really create a resource that the Welsh speakers were actually going to use themselves as well. So the whole design was basically community driven and sort of co-designed with the end users from the start. So, you know, it was really investing a lot of time with the actual community of those people that are going to contribute. Okay, so we created this resource that's 11 million words, as I said, semantic tagger, novel part speech tag set as well. And we tested community crowdsourcing in order to actually develop this tool, this resource, sorry. And the idea was to have a model of corpus construction for similar sorts of contexts. In terms of best practices then, well, that idea of stakeholder engagement and community, the importance of the crowd was really, really important from the start. In order to actually get particularly speech and natural sort of spoken communication, you actually need to go out and kind of talk to people, I guess. Sounds obvious, but there we are. And trying to kind of get people to understand the value of what a corpus is and what it can do. A corpus is a bit of a funny sort of concept. It's quite an abstract thing. So a lot of time and investment was needed in order to ensure that people understood how they might benefit from it, but also the sort of contributions that it might have in terms of the kind of cultural heritage and that sort of aspect. I could go on, but I'm going to start with just those couple of thoughts. So stakeholder engagement has been really important, the importance of the crowd, but also those end users. So engaging people from the start, so academics, teachers, researchers, learners, and all of those, we know how corporate might be used, but all of those sorts of users and the general public, a lot of time was invested in that from the start in order to ensure that we could actually work with communities. Is that a good starting point?
That's a perfect
I could
start.
go on, but I won't, otherwise I'll be ranting.
Yeah, I totally agree about like talking to the communities directly, and we'll talk about that later when referring to other questions about like sensitivity of the topic and things like that. Antonio?
Okay, I will insist again in the importance of spontaneous speech data and archives. So I think the most important contribution of spontaneous speech is that you can record actual conversation with people, and with not only with any kind of people in your community, with any kind of background, occupation, level of studies, whatever. So if you can get people involved and you got the recordings, and then the next step is to transcribe. 25 years ago, when we started doing this in Madrid with the current technology at the time, we spent a lot of effort, not only in the recordings, but also in the transcribing, manually transcribing. So in the last 25 years, the technology changed everything. And nowadays, the actual speech technology can assist to the linguist to revise the transcription a lot. 25 years ago, you had to do by hand, because in the best cases, you only can get 50% of the transcription well done. But nowadays, with technology like Whisper, you can get maybe 90%. So you can get more recordings, and you can get these resources for the community. And of course, you can basically record memories, opinions, narratives. Can be monologues or can be conversations. You can use interviews to ask people, and it's the best way to get information about the minorities, because many of them cannot or are not very well literate, or cannot write down, or they don't want it to do, but everyone can speak. And this is our most direct way of communication. So you can get the people, every kind of speaker of your community, speak and give their narratives or whatever you want it. So I think this is a good point to spare. Okay.
Thanks a lot, Antonio. And Mohammed?
Yeah, great question. So I think, from a linguistics perspective, working with communities is important because of a number of reasons. If you think about linguistic variation, the way people, speak language, there's a lot of diversity within the same language. You take a language, I work a lot with Arabic and its dialects. I also work with African languages. And take Arabic as an example, right? So we have what we call modern standard Arabic, which is the modern, variety of the language that usually you don't see much in the street, but you see, in pan-Arab media and, educational settings and whatnot. But then this leaves behind, the way people speak language in everyday situations, right? So, and it varies, from not only from a country to another, but also within the same country. If you take Egypt as an example, the way people speak Arabic, in Cairo, which is the capital of the country, it's totally different from, if you go really south in Egypt, or if you go to the Sinai Peninsula, or even like Western to places closer to Libya. So it is important at a time where people are developing large language models to keep in mind that, who is going to use these technologies? Should we just, rest and end up using the same technologies that other people create for us, where these technologies, may be actually not representing not only the linguistic diversity characteristic of our language, but also, the content that is carried within these LLMs, right? And, a very easy thing that people would try to do if they want to extend these multilingual LLMs to a new language is like, okay, take data, translate it with existing technologies, and then you end up with coverage of new languages, right?
Yeah.
Which is really problematic for a number of reasons. So I'll kind of like keep my answer here. There are lots of lessons that we can learn as we try to build these technologies with communities. I'm assuming there will be other questions I can sort of like add to as we proceed.
Thank you, Mohammed. And Mustafa, you've got 1 minute now.
Okay. So the best practices for working with communities to develop corpora is actually, well, I would say for corpora means it could be text, it could be images, it could be audio, it could be other modalities. So as universities, so yes, indeed, we have to engage the communities in order to work with them and to develop corpora, but also we need to show them why developing corpora is important. In my opinion, okay, maybe these are the best practices everywhere in all languages, in all contexts, but in my opinion, there is actually a problem here. Still, developing corpora is still very expensive and very important, and the communities are still not aware of this importance. I always say there is the rewarding system in our community, in the natural language processing community, is not that mature, in my opinion, that to encourage communities to be engaged in developing corpora. Because developing corpora is so expensive, but we cannot develop tools or models without this. The copyright system is a problem. So sometimes, I mean, we visited here in Palestine, we visited many archives, museums, newspapers, and so on, in order to encourage them to help to collaborate with us to develop corpora. But they have the corpora, of course, but we need to annotate, to clean, prepare, and so on. But still, they don't want to do this because they don't see the value in return. So this is a big issue. So I will leave it here. I will not say that the world is very beautiful when it comes to developing corpora. Actually, we really suffer when developing corpora.
Thank you, Mustafa. So yeah, thanks to all of you. So to sum it up in like one sentence, we can say that reaching out to communities in order to develop corpora, but also maintain diverse narratives is, like, from all the answers that I've heard today, it seems to be like the most important aspect. So following up on that, the next question talks about what challenges arise in creating and curating corpora from underrepresented or low resource languages, and how can culture authenticity be maintained? And again, we'll start with you, Dawn.
Thanks, Mo. Big question, this one, but a very important question to ask, actually. So I said in the previous one, again, I'm going to draw an example of developing 𝐃𝐿 here. And I guess it's the first thing to say is it's really important. Oh, actually, let me just reverse. So I said that when we developed 𝐶𝐢𝐭𝐚𝐥, we tried to make it representative and to a certain extent balanced, which means we tried to really go out to all communities and try to kind of capture their own voices to ensure that we covered or we created a kind of sample of Welsh as it is used in multiple different contexts by different types of speaker, different ages, and so on. Obviously, trying to do that, as Mustafa said, is very expensive and really hard because it's trying to accommodate and trying to reach out to those marginalised voices. And that is the biggest challenge, I guess, if you're going to summarize it in one sentence. It's important to try to kind of get the marginalised voices, but do it in a really sensitive way and in a way that is, yeah, as I say, sensitive and considering ethics and a responsible way. So in terms of our own context, the sorts of things that came up for us is, first of all, actually having access to those appropriate resources. Again, Mustafa said that, actually being able to get hold of them, having actually sourcing the data, having the data in the first place. So for us, we wanted to collect books across different sorts of genres. Quite a lot of genres didn't exist. There are not many books that are actually published in Welsh. So, you know, there's not actually that much data out there to include. If we're collecting language that is kind of modern, contemporary, we're kind of really restricting ourselves because there isn't much out there. Certain things in terms of demographics, so certain types of demographics, again, it's very tricky to actually access things. Low publication numbers, as I've mentioned. Lots of challenges in terms of transcription. So for us, there are no standard transcription conventions for Welsh. So actually it's kind of reinventing the wheel, but there's quite a lot of responsibility around that. How do we represent a language in a textual form across the different varieties as well? Converting interest to data. So I said that we'd spent a lot of time trying to get people invested in the idea and actually to give us their data. But we found that there was a bit of a bottleneck. So they'd say, oh yeah, it's a great idea. We're keen to be involved. And then they would kind of peter out and it'd be very tricky to actually convert that interest to data. The main challenge for that was people saying my Welsh is not good enough. So regardless of how much time we said, you know, we want the authentic type of language that everyone's using, they were still thinking you're going to be judging me. And so that was a real challenge. How do you ensure that you balance that? Again, it's ensuring those marginalised voices are contained as well. And lots of things around permissions and ethics and responsibility. It's a cultural ownership thing. Who has rights to that data in the first place and who should have access? And I'm not going to stop speaking because I've just realised you are timing the session. So I'll let someone else.
Thank you, Dawn. Yeah, thanks very much. Antonio?
Okay. I will start with talking about the cultural authenticity. I think if you have recordings, this authenticity is preserved, mainly because of the context of the recording. Can be done at home, at work, school, in real context. So that's clearly a good point of the spontaneous speech corpora. And for me, one of the most interesting part of the spontaneous speech corpora is that they are natural, spontaneous, and non-scripted. For instance, if you want to prepare a second language material or to train foreign students or bilingual students, you take the typical conversation in a test, they are scripted by professionals and they don't use the same words and the same attitudes and the tone and all the grammar that typically we get when you just use your language in an authentic and spontaneous manner. So that scripted, non-scripted nature of the spontaneous speech corpora is very important. and they preserve the authenticity of the data. So, for instance, if you record memories for elder people, that's real amazing. And if you record a conversation between a grandfather and his grandchildren, that's amazing, really, right? Of even you record children talking between themselves, that's a really identity and important material for cultural preservation. So that's a good point, I think.
Thank you,
Okay.
Antonio. And Mohammed?
Yeah, I think one important question to ask as we start like a new project is, what is the end goal of this particular project? Sometimes you would create a data set in a particular way that wouldn't end up necessarily satisfying all the goals, right? So I think Antonio talked about authenticity, and if you go and for example, have these recordings between people from different generations. So this is something that you would need to train people how to do it, and if you do that, to what extent you'll be able to do it across different geographies and also across different languages. So that is a type of a project that you would do in a particular way. If you wanted to do something, that cuts across different countries, for example, and also spans over many, many languages, then actually being able to arrange for it and have enough people to contribute to the project, is a big question. I think Don talked about, and actually also Mustafa talked about, changing interest into actual data, eventually, having to go to people and convince them, okay, you have these different types of, they wouldn't even, their own terminology, they wouldn't even use the word data sometimes. So you'd actually, in the first place, explain to them what you mean by data, let alone translating this into actual usable content from a perspective of a computational linguist. So to summarize, I would actually say that you would run into challenges related to representation. You want to represent people from different communities speaking different countries. You would run into challenges related to training. So you would need to kind of, make sure that the people who are involved know what you are looking for in order to be able to help you to actually create it and make sure it is done in a particular way. And there are lots of other details that we could get into. I'm kind of like worried about time. I don't want to leave Mustafa to the 1 minute or 30 second.
Yeah.
So I actually passed this to Mustafa. So I'm always nervous about that part. Yeah.
Yeah. Thank you. Like he is happy with 1 minute. So 1 minute and a half, Mustafa. Been generous.
Okay, thank you very much. It's helping me, so I will go direct to the point. So the question is just to remind the audience about how to maintain the authenticity when developing models and corpora. This is we are actually coming to an era where it's not only the researchers who should care about maintaining authenticity, but also cultures themselves, dialects themselves have to push now. If you remember Google Translate, so many countries have been sponsoring corpora in order to be translated, to be represented. Otherwise, their culture will be underrepresented. So we are witnessing this era also with large language models. It's not with this globalization, I would call it. We need all cultures, all identities, all minorities to themselves to have initiatives to push. Otherwise, they will suffer. So it's not a choice anymore to anybody. So we need hand by hand to work together, the communities themselves, but also the researchers and the companies who are developing the models. That's it.
Thanks a lot, Mustafa. I mean, thanks a lot to all of you. I mean, I feel really bad stopping any of you because it's really interesting. And as you all said, it's not easy to answer such question. But from what all the answers, it's obviously a difficult and a tricky task to convert interest into data. But the other complicated part is how do you actually convert a culture, a language, people's different diversity, like varieties and diversity in languages into textual data. So that is a really tricky part. And finally, as Mohammed said, regardless of what your project is, you need to have some sort of a clear goal in the end and communicate that to the communities in order to get their help. Because as Don said, it is very tricky to reach out to communities, let alone collecting data or asking them to participate. All right, so the next question is, how can large language models, now talking about technologies, multimodal models and corpus building techniques support the digestion of culture heritage? It's a bit tricky question, but we've seen a lot of cases in language models actually making assumptions about other cultures. So it'd be good to hear what the panelists say. And again, starting with you, Don.
Do you want to start the opposite way to make sure that we all have a bit of a fair chance to speak a bit more? That's if Mustafa doesn't mind going first instead.
We can give it a try, sir. Under the spot, Mustafa, go ahead.
Okay, thank you. It's actually, this is a good question, and I hope the people who watch us are also not only the researchers, but also people coming from museums and archives and cultural heritage organizations, because they want to say, maybe everyone is expecting how large language models are helping. And we are actually entering really an era. We have really a revolution. This is how I see it, a real revolution for cultural heritage agencies. So I think large language models, and especially multimodal models, are playing a different game now. So we see, I will just quickly say that image capturing, just to name a few of the benefits of the things that we can benefit from multimodal models. So image captioning, we can have transcription of audio into text automatically. Machine translation is so good, and it can be trained to be even domain specific. Such things are so important in actually most of the work on preserving cultures, of digitizing, building metadata, and so on. This is all can be done by multimodal models and large language models. Conversational, of course, I mean chatbots, conversational agents is also an important restoration of some missing fragments of pictures, of text, of audio, and so on. Semantic search can be also something is so important nowadays. Maybe storytelling, knowledge graphs. Maybe people in this community, they are not aware much about so-called knowledge graphs. So like Wikidata, not Wikipedia, I mean Wikidata, to be built or constructed automatically, enriched with using large language models. To name a few. There are also maybe even bias. We can even we can take care of the bias and ethical issues more than in the past. We have more ability to do this in the past. We can build a lot of augmented reality applications, build with combined with large language models capabilities in order to have a different experience when it comes to visiting museums. So there are a lot of applications where that we can serve these museums and archives. At the same time, at the same importance, we cannot build such applications without having access to the data sets and corpora in these museums and archives. So it's win-win situation, but we need to spend time to work together.
Thanks, Mustafa. Mohammed?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's really problematic the way within the LLM space now things are seem to be working. You know, in the first place, the biggest of these models, you know, are pre-trained with data that are collected in a particular way. You go online, you collect, you know, however much data you're able to do, whether this is text or, you know, speech in the case of like something like Whisper, for example, from YouTube data. And then you just like pre-train a model, right? And then you assume that this model is representative, or you don't assume, but you know, that is what people would end up, you know, assuming anyways. Many people just think that they can take these tools and use them for, you know, whatever downstream application on whichever language. I mean, the problem is, in the first place, this assumption that, you know, data from different languages, from different communities are represented online is not true, right? So, I mean, 15 years ago, people used to talk about the digital divide. If you go to Africa, do people actually have even like connectivity or not? So we don't talk about these issues as much as we used to, but we tend to forget that the effect of this digital divide still is ongoing to date, right? So you can't really assume that people who speak a particular variety of language are connected, let alone involved in practices that you know, ends up availing their data online. So all of these assumptions are there. And then you end up like taking the data and building a model and think that this model would work great. And then somebody wants to, you know, challenge you, and it comes and says, okay, your model is actually not good for my own dialect or my own variety or my own language. So what I'm going to do is I'll take your model, I'll take some data, and then I'll translate it into my own language. Okay. And in order to show that it actually works for my own language or dialect, I am also going to take your test data, translate it into my own language or dialect, and then evaluate my model on it. Okay, like squared error here, like it's like error squared. Like it's kind of like, you know, many assumptions. It's so artificial. You know, the way this is kind of like built through this whole process. So just to summarize, I mean, I took one single point and I tried to kind of like develop it, which is many of the assumptions that are involved in making these, like localizing these models, are really flawed. And, you know, would have to go to things like Mustafa was talking about, go to people in local communities, convince them to engage with us, like in museums, for example, in order to use the content they have so that we develop from the ground up. And that's a long effort that would take a lot of time.
Thank you, Mohammed.
Yeah.
Antonio, I think. Yeah, it is Antonio. Yeah.
Okay, yes.
Mhm.
Okay, yeah, I agree completely. The main problem with the current large language model is data. And if we are talking about minorized cultures and languages, we don't have enough data. So the main point is to get speakers or resources or written tests or whatever and put in a digital manner. But the good point with this is, as I said, 20 years ago, the speak technology cannot provide good transcriptions. And the current one, yes. So if you get the data, you get the recordings, you can improve the way of your transcription and improve your language model and have better results. So I think that's one of the points. First, obtain the data from actual speakers, from a speaker for the community, and then try to use the current language model to transcribe or to do an annotation or whatever. So in that case, really we can get better results for sure. Thank you.
Thanks, Antonio. And finally with you, Dawn.
Thanks. So I've approached this question in slightly different ways. So I've kind of I've taken it as what kind of current methods for in corpus building and LLMs, what can they contribute? I also have a lot of ideas on some of the shortcomings, which I think we've picked up on now, but maybe you're going to ask a question on that in a minute as well. So I'll go back to the original thing about what can they support. I've taken it and I've divided it into two, basically in terms of corpora. We know what the positive things about corpora can be. And, you know, cultural heritage is often encoded through language. Corpora allow us to actually capture language. We know that. Linguistic resources can have lots of different functions, language revitalization, preserving linguistic diversity, great for language access, bilingualism, also creating and maintaining connections between speakers and their cultural linguistic identities. So they have, these sorts of resources are valuable. So what can LLMs do, I guess, when we're creating these sorts of resources? Trying to be positive. It can help us to look at corpora in slightly different ways. So help possibly a little bit with automated transcription and visualization. Doesn't work in Welsh at the moment because it's a minoritized language. There isn't any speech to text. Annotations can help a bit with that, I guess. You can do a few queries using LLMs and corpus data sets, and it can enhance the kind of querying of data and the generation of certain frequency lists, collocations, and help us to recontextualize patterns sometimes and make sense of extensive data sets in different sorts of ways. Again, I'm trying to focus on the positives. I've got lots of negatives for another question possibly. Can help with bits of translations and making things more accessible to a global audience at scale. But I'll be quiet now because...
Yeah, that's actually spot on time. Thanks a lot, Dawn. So from your answers, there's like two types of direction. So one is very positive that says technologies are good. They help transcribing things. You just make data accessible and available for analysis. But on the other hand, there is some sort of like a trust or over trust in these models. There are techniques done that ends up with what we call assumption loops. And instead of fixing the loop, we're just like expanding it by, as Mohammed said, we just keep adding to it different types of data, trusting in the main assumption of how this was created. Okay, so we're going to jump into the next question, which actually continues on that, which is saying how are large language models being used to document cultural heritage, and how can existing archives be utilized for training and fine-tuning them? So again, we'll start with you, Mustafa, because I quite actually like this order. It's yeah,
Thank you.
More time respecting. I'm just joking. Yeah, but go ahead, Mustafa.
So, as I mentioned earlier in the previous talk, that to document cultural heritage objects. So let's say, okay, what are the cultural heritage objects? Which are, first, it can be text, it can be image, audio, video, and so on. Now, first of all, let me focus on the image actually, because text is almost solved. So audio is clear. Audio, we need to multimodal models, not only to transcript the audio, to understand the audio text to audio or audio to text, but also need to answer questions. So we need to machines to be able to answer questions. And this is, we have a lot of progress so far on this. Now, it comes to questions and videos. We have actually seen amazing advancements recently on this. I expect machines or multimodal models to caption, to describe images, which means documenting them. So I will give an example of this shortly. So we need image captioning. We need the recognition of objects within images. So you don't search, give me all pictures where this and that. Videos, and including video summary also. So there are many such things that need to be done. I want to mention in the Palestinian Museum, we visited them last month. We found they have 400,000 images. It's a huge project that about several years trying to document them. Well, I will not say this is so interesting for us to use to train a model, but it's also, I want to say, well, we actually lost a lot of time and money to document these pictures, because we can do it automatically now with a very good accuracy. We can even answer questions. I mean, machines that are able to answer questions. Now, it comes to videos. At the same time, we need to discover events in videos, to summarize videos. We need to classify videos. So such things they were not possible in the past, are really possible now. And I really invite archives and museums to open their eyes and minds to this new technology, because it will help them a lot.
Many thanks,
Okay,
Mustafa.
I will stop here.
Thank you. Mohammed?
Yeah, I don't think Mustafa meant it when he said text is solved. So you know, unless you mean part of speech tagging on Queen's English is solved. You know, so I guess like, so the technologies would take time to build technology that really document cultural heritage for some of the reasons that we have discussed so far. So let me actually kind of like spend a little bit of time answering this question, talking about some of our own efforts for, you know, some of the Arabic dialects, for example. Because I think, you know, the time that we spend on a project, just trying to create something that is sizable, yes, it's a lot of time, but it's worth our time doing it this way. So we've been kind of like working with communities. So I call these community projects. So you need to put together a team that, you know, as many people as it is possible from different places that speak different types of dialects of Arabic, for example. And in this way, we've been able to create, you know, some data sets of our Arabic dialects. So we recently had this kind of like Casablanca data set that covers 8 different Arabic dialects. And from there, I think you can start moving to say, okay, now I can have like language technologies that can, you know, try to cover these dialects. I don't think, you know, this solves the problem. We need more efforts. On the image side, you know, we started by doing the same thing I was criticizing. You know, we take like data, we translate the captions or like the descriptions of the images into Arabic, and then we try to evaluate. Okay, and we show that, okay, you can get something, but it's not really kind of, you know, the high quality that you want. Then you move from there to you know, involving also with the community to create something that in the first place represents them. So, because the assumption that, okay, I'll give you an image, caption it, for example, or describe it. You know, who said that this image is what I, as an end user, will be interested in the first place, right? So now we have to go back and care about the things that, you know, the end users will care for. Otherwise, it ends up being, you know, what people usually call extractive practices. You want to create technologies because you want to end up using these technologies for the goals that you have, not the goals that the community for which this was created, like the community whose languages are represented in the data. So I don't know if this is clear enough, but, you know, a lot of the work that big tech have been doing in Africa, for example, have been criticized for these particular purposes. You want to make sure that the technologies serve the end users in the ways that the end users want to be served in order for these technologies to have an impact on these communities. I'll stop here.
Thank you, Mohammed.
Yeah.
I think I lost the order. Is it Dawn now? No? Who did we start with? So was it Mustafa?
Antonio now.
Antonio?
Okay.
Yeah, it's Antonio. Sorry,
Me.
Antonio.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, I cannot say more things that insist that the important is to get first the data from the actual cultural heritage, and then the technology can help to do the rest. But the important point is how to get all the materials, photographs, videos, movies, recordings, how to allow to get these recordings, all the things in a computer assisted manner, and then try to apply the language model to that. So that's the first thing. And probably the second one is also to train professional curators to do the transcription, catalog the resources, or even annotate information. And I think that's the main problem for everyone who start doing corpora or start doing cultural archives in any language. So I think the experience with other languages is that point, right? So I cannot give more insights.
Thank you very much, Antonio. And Dawn, finally with you.
Yeah, I'll try and keep it short and sweet. So I think, all of those points, yeah, so metadata and encoding is is a really important part of this, isn't it? Because it kind of also leads people into, it kind of provides you affordances of what sort of things you can ask of these models, actually. And that, you know, it kind of tags with the reliability of what you're actually getting out of things. And knowing what sort of questions you want to be asking from the outset is what determines how we construct a corpus. So we need to know what it's going to be used for in order to kind of to backtrack and actually design things. So it's difficult to preempt what sort of questions might be asked and how you actually engage with these models. So if I'm probably not making sense, but I can bring it back to a point that does make sense. Having critical data literacy is really important. So it's about what people do with it afterwards. You know, that avoids any sort of assumptions being made of what you're seeing in the data set, and being able to understand when there are biases and those hallucinations as well. So it's kind of all connected, but you have to be really considerate at every sort of stage, and the sort of impact things might have. Did that make any sense?
Just unmuting. It does make a lot of sense, Dawn. I mean, it all makes a lot of sense, and there was a lot of there was a kind of like a contradiction at the beginning because there was emphasis on the importance of the researchers' time working on this and how much it takes to annotate and build such data sets. But at this other time, there is the importance of the communities. But I do agree that whatever resource we're building, we need to think about what Muhammad called the end user, who's going to use that and what purpose. Because if we don't work from like that kind of direction, from the end user back to what is it that we want to develop, we might end up wasting a lot of resources, whether it's the researchers or the community's time, and end up building something that no one is going to end up using. And that's the risk here. That's what we were referring to at the beginning when we talked about like sensitivity of the topic. It is a sensitive matter. And if you're going to reach out to those communities asking for data, you need to be very clear with what is it they're going to benefit from in the end. Is it the product, the resource, or anything else that they can use? Okay, so now we reach the final questions. Then I'm going to go back to the audience and see if anyone has any questions. Hopefully I can unmute you for questions. So the fifth question for today is, what innovative approaches can ensure cultural heritage materials remain accessible, authentic, and preserved for future generation? I'm going to start with a random order. So I'm going to do Antonio, Muhammad, Dawn, and finally with you, Mustafa. So Antonio.
Okay, so I think the point is we agree, everyone here, that the utility of the resources is for the community. So engage community in a new ways of having data. Probably this is the best way to get the goals. So what's the new ways of involve people? It's strange. For the young people, it's easy because you can use the social media. But probably for the eldest, that's really a hard point to convince them to participate in this type of data gather. So yeah, I think we need to get people involved because they think this is useful for their lives, and also we need to get data easily, and that's the main challenge point for me. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Antonio. Mohammed?
Yeah, maybe I'll use this question as context to highlight the role of governments and policymakers, because I think, you know, in order to do something that is sizable, that is high impact, you know, you would need, you know, political will, and you would also need a lot of funding. And I think, you know, given in the first place, I think policymakers need to be convinced that this is necessary to do. Like, if you wanted to preserve your own cultural heritage, your own identity in this time and age, you'd have to take action. And that action has to be through people who are well trained, who know what they are doing, that they are going to go out and, you know, build the types of communities that Antonio talked about, you know, small groups, big groups, and so on, and also communities of practice. You know, I've had the opportunity to kind of like visit many places where, okay, here's a group of, let's say, archivists that are interested in AI, but they probably don't have the appropriate language to talk about it, but they know what they want. They know their needs, right? So I think kind of like talking to a lot of communities of practice, putting up together like all these small teams, big teams, in order to involve in projects that are charted and supported by policymakers, short term and also long term, is the way to go. And, you know, there should be a lot of educational policies around this. How do you put this in universities, or even like in you know, high schools, you know, in particular levels, and so on. So I think, you know, an ecosystem needs to be built in order to go forward and to maintain this into the future. Back to you, Mahmoud. Mahmoud seems to have dropped from the call, if I'm not wrong. So maybe, Mustafa, you can moderate, or?
Yes,
You're
Mahmoud
muted,
is
Mustafa.
out of
I'm
room.
happy
I don't
just
know
to go
why.
next if you want, and we'll continue, and assume you might come back in if that's okay.
Yeah.
But I wanted to pick up on that point again. Communities of practice, completely agree. And it's all about well, international level cooperation, really, and that sort of collaboration across different languages, really. Funding is so tight for everybody, but there needs to be a lot more funding for preservation sort of initiatives and for supporting this sort of cultural heritage, and finding and understanding the sort of importance and the value of it. Again, within the Welsh language context, we're very lucky because it's very much embedded in policy, but it doesn't mean they have lots of money. It means they have goodwill, and they're very good in terms of educating the need and the importance of this, but they just can't fund it very well. And I imagine there's other contexts that are very similar. So being able to balance that sort of need with finding other sorts of ways and initiatives of actually engaging people, possibly where you can't just pay, you know, lots of money to actually kind of build these things. And so the idea of having that community of practice, shared practices, but also, I guess, shared utilities, which again helps to support archives or corpora or any sort of systems for the long term. What else was I going to say? And education, would you say? So we talked a bit about understanding the importance of building and maintaining these resources. I'll give you an example, which is a complete sort of aside, I guess. But one from the Core Corpus, we ended up creating a sort of offshoot project in the sort of cultural heritage space, and it's a tool for analysing free text comments, basically. And we use part speech taggers, semantic taggers. I can see Paul Rayston's on here, who's a collaborator with Mo as well, to create a different sort of system. So it's corpus informed, but it was designed with the end user in mind in the first instance. We don't talk about corpora. We don't kind of give any of the sort of labels that we use in an everyday sort of context in our sort of research sort of identities. We don't use any of that sort of language. We just say this stuff does this stuff and it can help in these ways. And we found so much more engagement in that sort of end user sort of tool, and hiding the kind of this idea of what a corpus is. It made it far more tangible, made it more purposeful, I guess. It really is having that sort of end user, the populations, how people will benefit in mind at the start. That really helps. That was again an aside. Mo, you're back.
Yeah, sorry about that technical issue, but I am back. I think we're back with you, Mustafa.
Okay, I will leave some time to the audience to also suggest what innovative approach to encourage content owners to give access to their content. But I want to mention that this workshop, it's called the Nakba-NLP, actually was designed to encourage the community around here related to the Palestinian content, basically, to give their data, because you create community and you encourage people to co-organize events with you and so on, so that they can see and they can hear the importance of letting their data open source or open for research purposes at least. So this is one of the approaches to encourage people, but also, in my opinion, we should also try to find copyright tricks to help people, because, for example, archives get data or get pictures from families from here and there, and this is copyrighted. So they say, well, we can use it for museum purposes, but we cannot give it to everyone outside. But this is a twofold problems. It's lack of understanding how large language models can use it without harming anyone. But it's also, we need to be innovative in the way that how to allow or how to put such data online, at the same time respecting the copyright. So we need to be a little bit innovative and to explain and to negotiate with the content owners and so on. So each sometimes there are privacy things, we need to anonymize some content. Here we have some oral testimonies, and some of it is private. Well, actually, even some documents online are private. They are online, but they are personal. Some museums, they put it with a certain agreement, so that they give access to subscribers only, and so on. So we need to figure out what is the best for each modality, for each different type of content. Thank you.
Thanks a lot. Thank you, Mustafa. Thanks, everyone. And thanks to each of you panelists for answering the question. So to just summarize the final question, and I'm sorry again about the network drop. So I do totally agree with what each of you said, and especially with what Don said about the work that we've done on Welsh language. And one of the most important things is actually transparency. You need to be very clear with what is it that you're going to do with the data. When you talk to others who provide the data for you, your jargons won't make any sense. They need to understand, why are you creating this? Why do you want access to the data? We had a lot of experience talking to the Welsh government and other organizations in Wales, and what they need is, are you really going to create something that our community going to benefit from? And then the questions comes after that, how do you make it accessible? How do you make it authentic? and all of that are important questions, not licenses or any of that. We really need open source data, open source tools that others can use. We're very strict in our work with the Welsh government. We make sure that the data we use and anything that we develop is open access. So that's how you encourage accessibility for everything. But again, transparency. Thanks a lot. This is the end of our 5 questions. It's been really exciting hearing all these answers. And I'm sorry to interrupt any of you, but we're trying to maintain the time. So I'm going to open the floor now to the audience with questions. If you have a question, can you please raise your hand and I'll try and unmute you for any questions that you've got. But we need to keep time. We only got 10 minutes. Right, I'm going to go with you, Tarek. Oh, I don't think I have, because I've left the room. I don't think I have the privilege again to unmute people. So I'll leave that to Mustafa maybe.
Yeah, they can ask Tariq.
Yeah, thank you all for a really fascinating panel. You've all kind of touched on this in different ways, but I was wondering if panelists can talk a bit about kind of trust. I think Dr. Muhammad talked about histories of technological extraction. There's a lot of disenchantment with kind of Google and Amazon, understandably, kind of the providers of technological infrastructure more broadly. I think concerns about surveillance when kind of languages and images are sort of more thoroughly documented by technologies. And so that's to say, I think there are many reasons why people are understandably wary of having their data collected and sort of having their data used to train different kinds of AI-enabled models. And so I was wondering how that appears in kind of your respective work and how you kind of deal with the question of trust.
Thank you, Tarek. Can I just double check? Is that a question to one panel?
Just kind of broadly.
All right. Okay. All right. Okay. Yeah. Anyone want to jump in? Dawn? I'm unmuted. I'll go with you.
Yeah, there's a lot of work in terms of building trust. Okay, I'll play devil's advocate with this. I also worked, in addition to this particular, the core count corpus that I use as a kind of main case study here, also worked on kind of multimodal corpora as well, so corpora with videos as well. And I initially worked in that sort of area about 10, 15 years ago, and it was really, really hard to gain access to recordings. So, and to actually record people in those sorts of face-to-face sort of contexts, to video them and reuse their images. And we couldn't really get permission to actually release that data set. Push it forward to post-COVID times when people are working online in these sorts of environments a lot. We kind of repeated the project. We looked at kind of meeting room corpora, so meeting room sort of context, so these sorts of contexts. And we found it really easy to get permission to record lots of data and to release it. So that idea of trust, we thought it would be a really big challenge, particularly when it's meetings. But because people are doing it all the time and it's embedded in their daily lives, that was easy. I'm not saying conversations are, that's very different. And we found that very different. But trust is changing, and I think it's about the narrative. So for them, it was the fact that, you know, you're doing this anyway. This is like 70% of your working life might be online. You're recording it anyway. And we're using these existing sort of interactions, but we're using it for this sort of means. They're okay at doing. It's when you're kind of recording other things that aren't happening in this sort of environment where it's a different issue. That doesn't directly answer your question, but it does say some things are possible and things are changing because of the ubiquitous nature of digitization. Someone else can say something else.
Thanks, Dawn. Does anyone else in the panel want to add any points?
I think I will just quickly add that, you know, if particular communities do not want to go digital, that is okay. You know, there are lots of, you know, small communities that speak particular, like, you know, certain generations still kind of like have particular languages that are not really mainstream, not widely spoken, and so on. And they have all the concerns that Tariq talked about. And I think that is okay. I mean, there is a risk of, if there's another COVID, for example, and everything goes online, you wouldn't have a Zooms that would caption into your own language, right? Things like that. And, you know, some of this needs education and kind of like, you know, as you are building the trust with these communities, you also kind of need to explain to them what are the benefits, the potential benefits that would come from like, you know, digitizing and kind of like serving their language and so on. But again, I think mutual respect within these discussions is important. And these, again, are things that would take a lot of time. I mean, the context here in Canada, I think in Australia with Indigenous communities, in some places in the United States as well. And I imagine this is like, you know, also in many other places with Indigenous communities. So it's an ongoing discussion. Trust is important, and I think let's keep the discussion going.
That's it. Thank you, Muhammad. And we've got another question from Nizar that was muted.
Oh, hi. Do you hear me okay?
Yeah.
Okay, great. Thank you, everybody, for being on this panel. So my question to you is about this problem of like the dynamic nature of interpreting a narrative and how it affects the perception of the people you're collecting from. I mean, it's not exactly cultural heritage exactly, but the narrative aspect, particularly for events connected to trauma, because I imagine a lot of the people who are sharing their own stories about their experience are actually, it's not like a finished moment in time. In fact, if it's too far away and you've dealt with the effect of the trauma, memory may actually not be as precise. If you're too close, it may be clouded by the trauma of the experience itself. So narrative and how we remember, as you know, could actually change, but then the context of people listening to it could actually be different. Someone might hear a story about a particular event in the context of a certain time, you know, and interpret it in one way, and then later on interpret it another way. And I'm aware from people who do this kind of stuff that they're very conscious. How will people think of me after I share what I share? Am I a victim? Am I weak? Am I strong? All of these elements are just variables. And it kind of makes me, I mean, it affects the issue of trust in a different interpretation of the trust. Maybe that's exactly what Tariq was talking about. So I'm just curious if you have thoughts about how to deal with all of this dynamic aspect of it, because it's probably very important to the people who are sharing their stories and also for the people interpreting it, and then later on our technologies. Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you, Nizar. You look ready, Mustafa, so you go ahead.
I can reply. Actually, you know, in this panel, we are trying to say this is a technical, let's call it, in the sense that, you know, as researchers, as NLP researchers, we don't really sometimes handle all aspects. But when we collect data, we have to make sure that where the data is collected, especially from museums, that they took care of such sensitive things. So because, you know, I am aware that some archives here around that they have actually humans who double check everything before they document them. So these stories are typically you know, sensitive data is double checked by humans. But we as researchers, when we use them, we have to be very sure that also, you know, it's checked. If I answered you correctly?
Not really, actually. That did not answer it. Sorry if I may follow up. I'm talking about, you know, I'm not talking about the sensitivity of how they talk about it or the language that they use or something is appropriate or not appropriate or propagandistic or not. I'm talking about that they're telling their own truth at a moment that they themselves are dealing with the thing that they're dealing with, right? So it's kind of like the problem. If you talk about an event that has finished, 10 years before, and you've already gone through therapy and you've survived it, you can talk about it very differently than if you ask that person to talk about it right at the moment, or if they feel that they are still in the middle of it and it's not finished. And all of these are factors that affect how we think of narrative, right? And so I think, I mean, it's a challenge actually, even to the curators. Or maybe you could say, I mean, I accept your answer, by the way, that we have to work with the data that we've got. That's all we have. But it must be that we have to be careful about framing it so that we are not making conclusions that are false, that actually are insulting to the people who are still suffering through it or have dealt with it, or, there are many factors. It's not actually about the Nakba specifically. There's so many, traumas around the world of this kind. And I think it's a general question in that sense. There may be no good answer, but I'm just curious to see if you've thought about this, what kind of, restrictions or ways of thinking to deal with it. That'll be great.
Antonio, if you want to unmute, then maybe we can take one more question by Owen, and then call it.
Okay, I never thought about that. Yeah, Lisa. I think the only way I can imagine to get is the having two different recordings of the same narrative and trying to explain the context of the recordings. And then if you go through a reevaluation of the narrative, then you can tell also in the case of second recording. It's the only thing I currently think about how to solve that problem.
Thank you, Antonio. I'll go with one more question by Owen, and I think that would be the end of the audience questions today.
Okay, thank you. This is the potentially very short question. One problem with involving the community, which is obviously a crucial aspect, in particular if we're dealing with linguistic or dialectal minorities, this is important. And this has been brought up by, I think, all of you on the panel. One problem is that often the specific kinds of annotations we might want to do cannot actually be done by members of that community. So in the dialectal variation workshop yesterday, a researcher from Luxembourg said she cannot hire anyone to do annotations on the Luxembourg dialect because no one is trained in annotating it. There is no standard orthography like in many, like for the Arabic dialects, and no one is trained linguistically enough to do it. So what should they do in that case? Can an outsider then come in and define an annotation standard and apply it to this minority dialect, in this case, Luxembourgish? Or is that just something we just don't want to do?
Thank you, Owen. So it's between Dawn and Mohammed. So Dawn, do you want to start if you have an answer? Since you're unmuted, just saying.
Yeah, tricky. And actually, so I don't know the answer. It's kind of trying to collectively articulate what the challenges and limitations, whatever practice you can do will be. So it's with the Welsh language context, we did struggle actually. There aren't many corpus linguists who are Welsh speaking, or linguists who are Welsh speaking, who have the specific expertise that we needed for the project. Actually, there was only about 5 people in the whole country that we could try to kind of to source and actually kind of engage with it. So it's, as in 5 people who are looking for a job, let's say. There was other people as well. So it's, yeah, we did have to kind of create our own practices, but there was a lot of fact checking, a lot of going back to the community to actually make sure that what we were doing made sense, which made it very time consuming, really, really time consuming. So even as I said before, in things like transcription conventions, creating a sort of standard set of transcription conventions for Welsh is problematic because there's so many different varieties. And how do you do that? It's a lot of conversation. And I think it's also documenting those processes and documenting the sorts of negotiations that you have and the compromises you make and giving a rationale. And that's the only way you can do it, I guess. Someone could obviously pick up on it in the future and say there might be better ways of doing it, but right now, let's just fessing up, I guess, but trying to be principled, but knowing what your limitations are. That probably didn't answer.
Thank you very much, Dawn. And I think that takes us to the end of our panel today. So thank you very much for the panelists and for your answers. It's been really exciting and interesting to hear all about like these challenges about languages, especially with dealing with sensitive data and sensitive communities and how to approach that in a way. But also when you build these resources, do you think about the end user? Are you transparent and communicating the final product, resource, or technology to that community and explaining to them what is it or how is it going to benefit them going forward? There's a lot of talk about LLMs and the assumptions made, and can we actually say that this LLM or that model does represent that language or not? And this is actually a big question to answer. In any future work that you do, you need to like understand what that language culture that you're talking about, and do you really think it can be represented in the model that you build, and so on. And thanks again for everyone. Thanks for the audience for being there and for asking questions.